If you're happy with the same old ways of dating,
If you enjoy sucking at communication,
and you have no desire to improve your romantic life, then our podcast might not be for you.
but if you want some out-of-the-box ideas to deepen your current relationships,
broaden your sexual horizons,
develop a better understanding of yourself,
or learn more about non-monogamy,
Then you've come to the right place. I'm Jase,
I'm Emily.
and I'm Dedeker.
and this is the Multiamory podcast.
Forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we are talking with special guest Sex Nerd Sandra about consent. Consent is a hot issue right now, but in this, we're gonna kind of get into some of the real stuff here, not just the intellectual concept of consent, but what it actually looks like in your life, what it means to have ownership of your own body, what it means to actually educate people about consent, what consent looks like in long-term relationships. Just because you're married doesn't mean consent isn't something that you need to think about. And then also, I want to say this right now, a small trigger warning. This is about consent. We do talk a little bit about sexual assault and things like that. So just come in prepared, or if that's something you're not comfortable with listening to, maybe go back and listen to a different episode. All right, thank you so much. We really appreciate Sex Nerd Sandra for coming on this episode, and let's go to that now. And here we are with Sex Nerd Sandra. Hello, welcome to the show.
Hi.
It's good to have you.
It's good to be here. Anytime I get to be in my pajamas while talking.
Wait, okay. Can I clarify something before we get started here?
Sure.
Your pajamas are Ghostbusters pajamas?
Yes,
Oh,
currently.
that's super awesome.
I mean, I have a lot of onesies, but my girlfriend just gave me these. These are the Ghostbuster onesies. It's a Ghostbuster onesie. And there's a patch on the arm.
Yeah,
and
I saw the patch earlier, yeah.
But then, and it also has a giant patch of the pack on the back.
Oh my
and a hood.
Oh, wow.
That's
oh my
so
god.
That's amazing.
For those of you who
She's
are
great.
watching the video, you can
See parts of this
out
onesie.
View a little
firsthand.
bit of it.
A little bit of this, a little bit
Wow,
of
a little
Wait,
bit of
that.
does it have your
Wow.
own name like printed on it?
Oh, I wish we didn't get that hardcore.
Oh, that would be really cool though.
That's
You
super
should consider
lovely.
getting a Sex Nerd Sandra patch and putting that
And sewing it on there.
front there. Yeah.
Oh man, oh, this is an off-duty onesie.
Got
My
it.
on-duty onesie is a kangaroo. I've taught
sweet.
online
Okay.
classes with
Got
my
it.
kangaroo.
Nice.
I like that though. I like the who you gonna
Yeah.
call. Sex Nerd
Sex Nerd
Sandra.
Sandra.
Exactly.
If you
Okay.
got something stuck in your butt, go to the emergency room.
Sex Nerd Sandra. Or wait, no. I mean emergency room. Okay, well, so I'm sure many of our listeners
note.
now are like, who is Sex Nerd Sandra? Should I call her? I don't know. So Sex Nerd Sandra, will you please kind of give us a little intro, explain who you are, what you do, if people can actually call you or not?
Just don't. Don't call me. It'd be weird. It's my career and who I am as a sex nerd has evolved a lot over the years, though. On paper, I am a sex educator for adults. I normalize sexuality and reduce shame for people. So it's a lot
That's
of
lovely.
restoring the basic default settings of humans before judgy people get a hold of us. And I usually do that with humor and lots of workshops around different sexual pleasure ideas like kink or oral. And I teach at different universities, and I host a podcast. There's over 200 episodes called Sex Nerd Sandra.
Wow.
We couldn't think of a different title, so we just called it what I was called. So it's confusing sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it's just a topical, sex positive podcast. Yeah.
That's
Nice,
awesome.
Nice.
Yeah,
I
I
really like
highly
that.
recommend it as well.
I really
You what?
like that. What you? Sorry,
There's
now
a
we're talking.
there's
all
a
over
there's a
each
lot
other.
of hosts.
I know.
You
There's
guys,
a lot of
hosts.
things going on.
Yeah.
Too many hosts in the kitchen.
Okay, who's first? Jase, you have
Jase, go
something?
first.
No, I was just going to say, I really recommend the podcast. You should check
Oh,
it out
thank you.
if you haven't
Okay.
already.
Oh.
It's great.
Phew. All right.
Okay.
Dedeker, go ahead.
And I was going to go on to say, I actually really like your turn of phrase there, talking about getting humans back to kind of like our normal default human settings around sex. Because I feel like that's kind of part of the whole endemic issue, right, with sex positivity, is that a lot of us have been raised in a culture to think that, you know, enjoying sex or wanting pleasure, having an interest in sex are things that are not necessarily abnormal, but things that shouldn't be embraced, things that shouldn't be considered to be outwardly normal. I kind of like that definition of sex positivity, really.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Coming back to normal.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think of it's an answer to sex negativity.
Yeah.
I mean, sex neutral would be nice, just society-wide.
Yes. We've covered that
We
on this
talked about
podcast
that,
before
yeah.
about exploring sex neutrality and what that
Right.
exactly would entail.
Yeah.
So, however, today we've brought you on not to necessarily talk about sex positivity. I'm sorry, but we really want our listeners to kind of get some of the basics and beyond, specifically about consent. You know, right now, consent is a hot topic. I mean, it's always been a hot topic, but, you know, I feel like right now, considering, you know, bullshit that's gone down with the current political climate, with the Stanford rape case that got, you know, so much press time, you know, I feel like consent is coming a little bit more into the public psyche, as it should, you know, as it definitely should. And so we kind of wanted to open up with that, you know. First of all, you know, can you take us through the super basics of what consent entails?
Sure. I mean, I will try. I am not a consent nerd. I mean, I agree with the fact that people should have it and stuff. But I definitely feel like I will share with you what I got. But I pay attention to butt stuff way more than I pay attention to the steps in consent.
No, it's okay. And I get that Consent Nerd Sandra is way less catchy sounding.
It really is. It really is. And that's why I chose Sex Nerd Sandra, because it just sounded good.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually hated it at first when I first thought of it.
Oh,
Really?
Oh, yeah. I was like, ugh. Oh, who wants... Ugh. It's too... There's a lot in your mouth. Ugh. That kind of... Like, it was just
No,
like...
it's great.
But it just described so aptly who I am and what I'm about. So consent is, in the basics, if you just look it up in the dictionary, it's just an agreement of what you're going to do. That's it. An agreement. Like, high five. Let's get pizza. Pepperoni? Sure. Consent is achieved. Like, it's not that... We make it seem so abstract.
I feel like it's something that, especially, you know, amongst like college campuses right now, it is more of a hot topic. And I feel like for me, it started becoming that like right toward the end of my college career, as it were. But that really before that, and this is a conversation we've had in our Facebook discussion group as well for Multiamory, is people asking like, hey, were any of you taught consent in like health class in school? And pretty much everyone universally is like, no, I'd never heard of it till
0%.
college or till after college, right? That it is...
No one ever talked about it at my college.
Yeah.
Right.
No, me neither.
Sure. Yeah. For me, it was something that came up just right kind of toward the end of college. And it's something that's been, I've become more aware of later, but it just wasn't talked about. It's something we're not taught about on either side, either getting it or knowing how to give it or not give it. So that's kind of why we wanted to cover those basics and why it's worth talking about.
It's super worth talking about it. I think the way I translate the word consent in my mind, because especially on college campuses, we like to use big words like your privilege, your male privilege, patriarchy, and it's like, well, what is that? You know, so if you aren't understanding what that word means, you kind of just nod and go along with it, and you have no idea what people are talking about. I think of consent as body ownership. When it comes to sexy time, and it's almost like, now I've never owned land, but I do nerd out from time to time. I live in a very expensive city, Los Angeles, but it's you don't just buy land and then own it. Like sometimes you can't even use the rain that lands on your land because that is stolen by the government, or somebody can walk through your land because they own land behind you. Like it's just so when I think of I own my body, I'm allowing someone to come on my body
Nice.
to join me on my land, but I may not be saying that they can do whatever they want there. I might just be inviting them over for pizza.
I think the property term is like an easement.
An easement,
that
right?
They're allowed to use a certain section of your land,
Yeah.
not necessarily all of it.
Be like, for this date, we have a temporary easement
Right.
on my body and your body.
Uh-huh.
It's not that complicated. Like you have the Brock Turner case where just the language around it, like he's basically found having sex with somebody who's unconscious behind a dumpster on the Stanford campus, and he's like wrestled away from her body by like two Swedish dudes or something, like just when they find him. And just the fact that that's not immediately like, oh, that person should go to jail forever. Because like, oh, well, she went to this party and oh, well, maybe she won. And it's like, ooh, that's crazy talk.
But he's a swimmer.
It's like, if he stole a wallet, would we be arguing about this?
Exactly.
So the fries, like I saw this Planned Parenthood posted this on Instagram and I loved it. And it's just a picture of French fries. I love French fries. I'm all about fried
we
food.
all wanted French fries after
really want French
Jase was
fries.
like, so fries.
I told
Yes,
What?
fries.
Yes, fries. Yes, I consent to fries. I consent to fries.
I consent to fries.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you think of the word fries, Fries, that helps you get through the basics of what consent means. F for freely given. Okay? Say it after me. Freely given.
Freely given.
Really good.
Good. R, reversible at any time.
Reversible.
Reversible
Reversal
at any time.
anytime.
Good job.
Okay.
There's going to be a vet in here. I is for informed. You know what you're getting into. Informed.
Informed.
Yes. And then E is, I believe me, I haven't gone over this because I didn't realize we're going to go over fries. E is, Jase, do you remember?
Enthusiastic.
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 And then S is specific.
Dedeker guessed
Specific.
sexy when we were going over this earlier.
Emily guessed sanguine.
Oh yeah.
She's really into blood play, I guess.
That was the first word that came to mind. I don't know why.
I'm not going to yuck your yum.
There it is.
Do it. So going over it, it's F is for
Freely given.
Fries.
Fries.
R.
Reversible. You can take it back at any time.
I.
Informed.
Yes.
Am I the only good student in this class,
Dedeker,
guys? Come on.
E.
Enthusiastic. Oh god. We're failing already. My goodness.
Emily, S.
Sanguine. No. Specific.
Specific. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. So when we look at this, things like feeling coerced, when you have a power dynamic in a relationship, like one person tends to pay for everything, or one person is employed by the other person, you have lots of reasons why someone might feel like they are coerced, like they have to say yes and they don't have the freedom to say no.
Yeah.
Consent doesn't even exist if you can't say no. If you think there will be violence, or you'll lose something, or you'll be in danger of something, those are all reasons for coercement. Emotional abuse, when those things are present, it is much more likely that you're not really having consent in a relationship. And consent doesn't even have to be about sex. It can be about how you talk to each other. It can be about how you spend your shared finances in your shared bank account.
Sure.
And then R, reversible. While some people, when they think of that, they think of 2 weeks later, someone might go, I didn't consent, I changed my mind. That is unlikely and very rare. And people who freak out about that sort of thing are worried about that thing, like really need to I don't know. I have things to say because I posted this and people were like, nah, women are, so
God.
that's a side note. But what it truly means, and this is essential, this is really essential, is that it's reversible. So if I say, yes, I would love for you to put your entire hand inside my vagina, if we're 3 fingers deep and I'm not feeling it anymore, I can be like, you know what? Let's put a pause on that and maybe shift to something else.
Yeah.
How about your vagina? You know, it's
Right.
it's essential to be able to shift gears.
Yeah.
Because I've had non-consensual experiences. I've had coercive experiences. And that panic, I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where you said like, yeah, I'm down. And then 15 minutes later, you're like, I don't really feel it, but I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to ruin the mood. I don't want to make them mad at me. And then you just kind of go along with it and your heart's not in it. And that's unenthusiastic, which is the E. And generally a maybe or a meh is a no.
Right.
So if you're really on the fence, hear yourself and say no. So
I've also heard this put in terms of like that what you want to get is a hell yes. Not just a like, okay, but a hell yes, right?
Yes.
An excited, enthusiastic yes.
Yeah, and the tough part when you really dig into that is that life is more complex than that. Like you have people who aren't always a hell yes to sex, but they're they know from their couples counseling session that they'll probably be excited about it in 10 minutes, and so they just need to get their body warmed up, and so a willingness. You need to at least have an enthusiasm for being willing. But like generally speaking, especially when you've got drugs and alcohol floating around at parties and you've got, new dates and all sorts of relationship agreements, generally a fuck hell yes is a good idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, something you just said just now kind of brought something up for me is that I think that sometimes when people think about consent, and like when I was in college, we had a party every year that was like the biggest... our second biggest after our drag ball. I went to a very liberal college. Our second biggest event was called Safer Sex Night. And it was a big, like, all-school dance, I guess you would call it. And they would have, like, workshops about sex stuff. Like, there'd be a workshop on fisting or a workshop on using hot wax or, whatever it is. And they would also have like demonstrations during the night on the dance floor about practicing safe sex. Not
like actual penetrative
not
sex?
Actual sex, but more like more like little skits.
Not that liberal of a college.
Yeah, like little skits that would be acted out about practicing safe sex. And anyway, they had something that was sort of a recurring thing every year, was this thing called the Tent of Consent. And in it, you could go to it with another person, and usually there was a line to get into it. But it was like literally a camping tent set up in the corner of the student union or whatever. And you would like say beforehand what you were both consenting to do in there, and you'd have 5 minutes or whatever it was. But I think that model of looking at consent, though, is actually a little bit problematic. In that the idea that consent is something you're like, well, okay, what are we going to do tonight? Well, we're going to consent to these specific acts, and now we're going to go do these.
What do you think's the problem with that? I mean, I can think of several, but I'm curious what comes up for you.
Well, it has to do with what you were saying, is that idea of like, well, I might not be totally feeling it right now, but I'm open to it. I'm enthusiastic about being open to it. And that on the one side, there's that problem of saying like, well, if I'm not totally feeling this right now, and I've said this to multiple female partners of mine, when it comes up, it's like, I'm not like totally feeling it right now, but if you started like kissing me in a certain way, I'm going to be into it. Right? Like, I don't have to be a hell yes right now, but I'm definitely open to becoming a hell yes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Right? And then of course that you have negotiation and checking multiple check-ins.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to get to, is that. That there's sort of multiple check-ins throughout. The consent isn't just something you decide and then you do. Because the other side, like with the reversible, is that we might say we're going to do something and then we start doing it and I'm like, I'm not into it. This is not,
Yeah.
So we're going to take a quick break, you guys. Really quickly wanted to talk to you about the best ways that you could support our show. the best way that you can do that is to head over to Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/multiamory, you can become one of our patrons. And if you sign up to become one of our patrons at any level, you get some kind of awesome perk. You know, if you sign up at the $5 level, you get invited to our private Facebook discussion group, which is awesome. If you sign up at the $9 and above level, you can get an invite to our monthly video discussion groups, which are also awesome. Even if you connect at the $1 level, you get connected to the rest of our Patreon community, which is just populated with amazing people who are willing to listen to all your problems. Maybe not all your problems, but it's a great community of people. That's all I have to say about that. So that is one way that you can do it. What's another way that they can support our show?
Another
Toothbrushes.
thing, yeah, toothbrushes. Another thing you can do is to check out our sponsor, Quip. Quip makes awesome toothbrushes that are actually built around actually helping you to brush your teeth better. I know that sounds ridiculous, but their whole philosophy is kind of doing away with a lot of the ridiculous bells and whistles out there and other things that you think you need, and just getting to actually what dentists say, like, hey, this is what's actually going to make your teeth better. Emily and I both have these, and we love them.
Love them.
They also come in all sorts of different cool colors. So if you have your whole poly pod living in one place, you could have everyone's toothbrushes on the mirror in adorable little colors next to each other. I'm excited to experience this. And when you sign up, you can sign up for a recurring every 3 months. They'll send you new heads for your electric toothbrush, so that you're always using a fresh head as often as you're supposed to replace it. Because I know if you're like me, you don't replace your toothbrush as often as you should. But when it just gets sent to you, you can do that. And if you use our promotion, which you can get by going to tryquip, that's tryquip.com/multiamory, you will get $10 off your refills, which means 2 free refills, I think, actually, because it's only $5 per head that they send you. So you'll get free refills when you sign up. It's awesome. Highly recommend checking it out. I've been loving mine. I know Emily has as well.
I love mine.
Yes.
And everybody can use some new head, so
Heyo.
it's exciting.
Heyo. Well
Wait,
done.
we're talking about sex today.
With consent, of course. With consent.
Yes.
Yes.
Head and consent. So
Awesome.
yeah.
And then the last thing you could do is to write us a review. If you don't feel like buying a toothbrush right now, and you don't feel like joining the Patreon, or maybe you already have, is to write us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help us a lot. I know it seems like a small thing, but it really helps us a lot in terms of getting the word out, helping new people find us. We've gotten some really amazing reviews recently, and I want to say thank you to those people who've written those. It really does help us a lot, and it costs you nothing except for a few minutes of your time, and it'll warm the cockles of our hearts.
Yay. And back to the show.
Woo!
I have a friend and fellow sex educator named Heather Elizabeth. I don't know if she has a different scene name. And she's in the leather community in, I think, Vancouver or somewhere. She's great, and she teaches consent with a few other friends at different things. And the thing that really took away when we were talking about it is that you create it together. Consent isn't this line you cross like you're trying to get someone to sign something so then you can take all their vagina juice. Like it's not. It's that old 1950s idea that one person has to kind of refuse and be hesitant and finally go okay, and the other person's like, yes, I finally get to do stuff. Like that's so your parents' sex. That's so your grandparents' sex. Like both people come as free agents to the table to create this fuck yes experience together, whatever that means minute by minute. And that's, I think, what a lot of coverage of the consent stuff is missing is that new...
That you're both creating it?
Reality. Yeah, that you're both... And you're that whole boys versus girls idea is just really...
Yeah,
old.
no, that's exactly what we wanted to transition into next, was this idea of the way that we look at consent differently for gender. I mean, we already talked about the fact that most of us, pre-college did not receive any kind of education about consent as it is.
Yeah.
Post-college, it seems like a lot of the conversation around consent, to me, my perception tends to be aimed at men. That it's about like, make sure you're getting consent, make sure that you're not doing anything that's coercive. And it kind of leaves out women
as free as agents.
That we don't get educated about consent either. And so not only do we, not become aware of what to expect, we don't become aware of necessarily like how to give enthusiastic consent, but we also don't become educated about how we need to ask for consent as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like we do too, because there is this whole, again, like you said, really tired out expectations of gender that like, well, the man is always going to be up for whatever. So the woman doesn't need to ask.
I was doing some research. I don't remember what I was researching, but I discovered that there was this whole world of men who had been sexually assaulted by women
Wow.
in college that were, of course, because they're taught that you always need to want it, you're always wanting it, that had no recourse, didn't feel comfortable reporting it. I think it was some kind of research paper on it. And it was often in the middle of the night. They'd sneak into their room. They'd be hard because they'd be asleep. And then, they'd wake up and be having sex with somebody and that kind of thing. Yeah. Or, just be mounted or for whatever reason. Like we think that an erection equals
Consent.
Right.
An erection means it's an invitation or something, which it's not. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody needs to learn the rules of engagement around touching other people's bodies for their pleasure and your own pleasure or whatever. But that's one of the amazing things. We talk about high school and college. That's one of the big things. Of course, some random person's calling me on Skype. Children, when we talk about comprehensive sex ed, people freak out. I wish we called it relationship education. Because when we talk about sex ed starting from kindergarten and preschool up through college, what we're talking about isn't talking about little kids about sex. We're talking about feelings and we're talking about ownership of your own body. And if we shame kids for knowing the words for their genitals,
Sure.
and if we shame them for feeling like they can say no if somebody wants to hug them, they're more likely to be victimized. They're more likely to be vulnerable to that sort of thing. So it's not just about men versus women and high schoolers and college kids. It's about keeping everybody in every age group safe and empowering them to recognize when they're being, they need to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a couple things that come from an exercise that the Sex Positive LA group does. And I know that you've done that, Sandra, before. And there's also, other chapters in Seattle and Portland and Salt Lake City and other places. But
is it the Cuddle Party thing?
No, this is specifically their consent thing that you did kind of a version of at the workshop last weekend where I saw you, was about practicing saying no. And one of the things that they talked about in that is that one of the reasons why this is so important is because of kind of what you were just saying, is that as children, we're taught that we're not allowed to say no. Right? It's like, go hug your Aunt Betty. And you're like, I don't want to. And it's like, just do it.
Right?
Right. That you're not allowed to say no to physical contact if it's expected of you. And in that
your
case,
body is not your own.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the second part of that I think comes out of it is something that, so you do this exercise where you get paired off with people and maybe you'll rotate around and do this with multiple people. But one person will ask to do something with you, and you have to practice saying no. And you can say no, thank you. You can be polite about it. And when people do this exercise, a lot of people will not just say no, thank you, or no, they'll say sorry. They'll apologize for it.
Sounds like something I'd do.
or like no, maybe
Yeah.
later, or maybe another time, or like I don't know, that it's this, that saying no is somehow you're the one hurting them, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think that was something for me in doing that exercise was really powerful.
Yeah.
Kind of realizing that and going, fuck, you're right. Like we do feel so bad about saying no,
Yeah.
rather than kind of giving the no. And this is, maybe I'm getting a little bit too, woo-woo esoteric here. But, by giving a no in a confident way, knowing that it's not reflecting on them, makes it easier to receive as well. We've talked about that before. Like if you tell someone something expecting a bad reaction, you're more likely to get it because they're sensing how you're giving it. That there is something, I think, really powerful to practicing that. I don't think it's something you can just click a switch and do that, but that's why I think those sorts of exercises about saying no, or saying, no, I'd rather not do that, but what about this instead, is really useful.
Yeah.
To just get used to it.
What was I gonna say? Yeah, people say sorry. People say maybe later.
Yeah.
Like to be able to just close it right then and there is challenging. I still have challenges with that. It's
for sure.
It's difficult. I don't know if they give you or if they go deeper in the next exercise, or they give you the ability to say to show appreciation that you said no.
Yeah, and that's something that really, what for me was actually the biggest part of it, doing that exercise, was that when you receive the no, you saying, thank you for taking care of yourself.
Interesting.
And I actually used this on a first date.
Wow.
When
Really?
I think I told this story on the podcast before, actually, but not quite in this context, but where I asked if I could kiss her at the end of the date, and she's like, it's not a total no, but like I'd really rather not right now. I'm just not quite feeling it. And I kind of had that pause of like, thank you for taking care of yourself. I actually said those words from that exercise. And she told me later that was huge for her. That was
she made
that
out
was
with you.
awesome. That
It's great.
Yeah.
It's so essential for trust building.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you gonna believe their yes if they can't say no?
Right. Yeah, that's a great way to put
that
it.
Makes sense. That makes sense. But let me just kind of pick that up and run with it a little bit, Jase, because I feel like so many places in our pop culture, specifically when it comes to like getting consent about things that are not necessarily sexual, like kissing, for instance. I mean, kissing can be sexual, of course, but we don't necessarily count it as like this is a sexual act, So many times that people have told me, or have told my male partners, or have told my male friends, like it's so unromantic to ask if you can kiss me. Like, why don't you just do it? And so it's interesting, like, we have kind of this internalized sense of, I don't know quite how to phrase it, kind of like, I don't know, it's like our standards for when we need to get consent are different.
Totally.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me a little bit into something that's a little bit related to that, because I wanted to bring up talking about, normally we talk about consent when it's kind of a new experience, like a new partner, first date, or the first time you're having sex, or maybe you're at a play party with a new, play partner. But we don't talk about consent a lot within the context of an established relationship.
That's a really good point.
And yeah, because I mean, obviously that's already been a topic, a point of contention about, for the past number of decades of figuring out like, well, can someone rape their spouse?
Wasn't
and
that
of
like
course,
women like couldn't say that they didn't want sex?
No, there's
from their male
still
partner?
it's something. There's like 57 countries where it's still legal for a man to rape his wife.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I'm just kind of curious about, like, how do we kind of open up the discussion about consent to include not just like, getting consent for the first time and then we're ready, but getting, continuing to check for consent even throughout a relationship.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, that brings up a lot of thoughts.
I watched you go through them all as she was talking.
Yeah.
I was scared.
Well, first, it's kind of amazing all the things we don't explicitly talk about that we expect to be what a marriage vow is really about. Like, we don't say, I promise, I vow to only put my vulva on you for the rest of my life. You know, like, and yet that is sexual dedication to one person is sort of an automatic for a lot of people, especially in their first marriage.
Right.
And I think ownership of another person's sexuality seems to be some kind of unspoken agreement, or unspoken expectation, I'd say, because I don't know if they agreed on it. I mean,
Well, and when you say ownership, it kind of almost takes the consent part out of it. It's like, I own you, and therefore I can do what I want to you when I want to.
right, you're part of me now, and I'm part of you now, and so everything that the light touches on you is mine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. You have a lot of people not going into relationships with intention, just going along with the script that they were given until something blows up. And so, I mean, what you're saying about, you know, killing the mood when you ask first, absolutely. For some people, that's super killing the mood. If someone kisses me without asking first, that kills my mood, though.
Right.
Because I'm like, unsafe, red flag.
Yeah.
And it shocks me, even in groups of communities where this is all talked about a lot, people still don't check in with me about things like safer sex before we engage in things. Like, I always have to do that footwork, and it gets exhausting. So for someone to be able to do the footwork before we get to the kiss part,
Right.
is really hot. So if you're not sure and you tend to make the first move, to, like, on the first date or second date, just being like, hey, what kind of communicator are you? I tend to communicate overtly, explicitly about everything.
Right.
And I think it's really hot to know that I'm wanted. At the same time, I know that's like super boring for people. Like, so what's your deal? And you don't have to, why are we waiting till the first kiss to be like, oh shit, I should have talked about this first.
Right.
It's like, the more you front end your communication, often the smoother the rest of it goes.
Yeah.
Nice.
So in long-term relationships, it's, you know, I haven't thought deeply about this, but the idea that just like that wonderful consent tea video that a lot of people have, like, just offering people tea. If you offer somebody tea once, doesn't mean every time you see them, they're going to drink your tea. And just checking in. I mean, Lou Paget, which is a sex educator from way back. She's like a classic one. She has a great metaphor about people who like to golf know that when you go out to the golf green, even if you golf on the same course every day, your whole life, the golf green is different every day. The wind is different. The grass is a different kind of moist, you know, all that stuff. So you've always got to golf on a new course. And so I think it in the same way that many people haven't been taught to infuse their relationships with vibrancy repeatedly and to continually cultivate. Instead, they think of it as this concrete thing that just sort of sets like Jell-O and then it's there forever. It's just not useful. And so relationships are as dynamic as people are. So I don't know. It's more of a philosophical framework shift than it is any particular tip.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. If you're going to extrapolate that, for instance, to the tea metaphor, which I really like. I mean, I guess there's kind of this sense in long-term relationships, like, so maybe after being with your partner for 3 years, you know that like every single morning they love it when you make a cup of tea for them.
And they like it with lots of milk.
Yes, and lots of milk. And so you do that.
Dirty.
You make them a cup of tea with milk every single morning.
I don't know
But
what
that
this
if
is
there's
a
one-
euphemism. Like, seriously.
But as in, if there's one morning where they wake up and they're like, ugh, actually, I'm going to skip the tea today.
You're going to
You don't get to
drink that tea.
you don't get to force them tea.
Damn it!
And you don't get to be angry
Right.
that they're not drinking your tea.
Whoa,
And-
now,
yeah.
no, someone can have feelings. Anybody
You can have feelings. Sure, you can have feelings,
be
but
angry.
maybe you can.
You
Okay,
just-
so you can be angry, but maybe you can't punish them with that anger. Is
Right.
that more accurate to say?
You can't straddle their chest, put your knees on their biceps, and force them to drink that
force them to
tea.
drink your tea.
That would be
Whoa.
illegal.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I don't know why that was so horrible. That was so
Yeah, that
vivid.
was
I'm
really
so sorry.
intense, Sandra.
I was like,
You need a trigger warning for that one.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, how else are you going to force someone to drink tea? You tell me.
I guess that's how you do it.
Right.
again,
you
what is
never-
this a euphemism?
That's just, I was
All
thinking
that
literally
milk.
of tea. I was literally. Anyway, or
Well, on
face
that
fucking,
note-
one of the two.
I also like that somewhere out there in the world, someone has discovered their new fetish for like forced tea drinking. Is like that's going to be a thing for someone, and they'll do it consensually.
Definitely.
I hope,
As long as it's
'cause they're-
consensually
yeah.
forced tea drinking.
Right, it's what we
Essentially
call
forced tea
consensual non-consent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Exactly.
fantasy non-consent.
Exactly.
But you just created that fetish for someone just now. I hope you
You're
understand
welcome.
that.
I can only guess the things that I've created in people's minds from the stuff I've talked
gosh.
about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been
Oh,
some
gosh.
intense stuff.
For sure.
I want to make sure before we wrap up that I put this out there, because of course I know that there's someone listening who has had assault in their past or has had coercement or abuse of different natures. Like it's regrettably common. In any room full of people, there's going to be somebody who's had an experience like that. So, and sometimes when you go to your community and you talk to somebody about an experience you had where you feel bad at that party or at that date and something kind of icky happened, they might label it for you like, oh, you were raped, or oh my God, we need to go to the police. Only you get to define your own experience. I want to just make that clear, because I have had non-consensual experiences. I've had like weird, icky experiences where I went like that. I really didn't really want to do that. Or I was really too drunk and I wasn't that present when that person was doing that, and they didn't even check in. I just want to make sure people know that doesn't automatically mean you were raped. That doesn't. Now, if you feel like you were violated, that is valid. At the same time, if you feel okay and you kind of need to just work out the weirdness and maybe, like just like polyamory, we make mistakes. And the importance is when people are like, oh my God, I am so sorry. How can we make this better? What can I do for you? You need space. I'm not going to do that again. I'll check in. Like, so when someone wants to make amends, that is a different person than the person who goes, well, screw you. Like, you clearly wanted it. And, that's more predatory behavior and a huge red flag. And all those things, people, there's plenty of resources, wonderful resources out there. Scarletine is a fantastic resource. Consent Coalition, I think, is a nonprofit that teaches a lot about this.
Nice.
Sweet.
So I just wanted to make sure that was a thing, because
Yeah.
too many people try and label other people's experiences.
Lovely.
Yeah.
No, I think that's actually freaking fantastic.
Yeah.
Because that is something that we, I think since this topic currently and in the past has been so emotionally charged, that I think because of that, it can be very easy for people to immediately hop straight to that like, oh, you were raped, like, oh, you were assaulted, you need to do something about this. Oh, this person is a monster. This person is a predator. And we don't always kind of take that second step of giving the person who experienced it permission to define what it is that happened, and permission to kind of react to that. So no, that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And for the record, I have myself not checked in with consent, and I have violated other people's consent. And so no one is above this thing. Like, we all are in it together. But it's about what we do with it after we find out what we've done.
Yeah.
And men can absolutely be violated as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
So
I mean, yeah, I can vouch for that. Like, absolutely. Like, I've been on both sides of that. Like you've said that you have, Sandra. That, and definitely those experiences where I've wrestled with that idea of like looking back many years later and being like, oh God, would that qualify as like I was sexually assaulted or something, but then having that kind of same question of what was my experience of it though? Like, is it that far, or is it just like, I kind of learned from that how to set better boundaries for myself. But even more recently, like especially at play parties, like we talked about, there's sort of this assumption that men will always want to do anything that a woman wants to do. And that is something that comes up sometimes, and you kind of have to, as a guy, if you don't want to do that, kind of politely be like, hey, that's cool, but like I appreciate the compliment, but no thank you.
And it's tough because guys have that thing where, because women's egos, if this is a man-woman thing, women's egos are really fragile because we're told that everybody wants us, and or that our job is to push people away more.
Right.
Not that it's really true, but it's there. I know plenty of guys who didn't feel comfortable saying no because they knew it would hurt the other person's feelings, so they were taking care of somebody else instead of taking care of themselves first, and that's not helpful for humans generally. Oh snap.
And it's also ultimately it's not helpful on the other side either, because if you find out later that person did something just because they felt like you needed it, not because they wanted to, that feels shitty for you too, right? Like no one wins.
I want people super happy on being all up on my goods.
Exactly.
I don't want anybody on the fence. So yeah.
Resounding fuck yes.
So we could seriously talk about this forever.
I know this.
And thank you so much, Sex Nerd Sandra, for talking so much about this.
You're welcome.
Last question is the question that we ask all of our Multiamory guests, which is if you're going to pick the one golden jewel piece of advice that you could give to people, specifically to our listeners who are people who are interested in non-monogamy or who are interested in being in non-monogamous relationships, what would your one piece of advice be?
Get a therapist.
Seriously?
Really?
Yeah. Go on about that.
That's great.
If you have healthcare access and you can afford it, it's really affordable in some places. If you get a trainee, somebody fresh off the boat of they all need to start with somebody. I just had to seek out couples counseling, sort of in an emergency agreement breach. And she was an intern, and I was like, what are the chances she knows about poly? And it turned out she had 3 different couples that she was working with that were poly.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah, there's because you're gonna get triggered, you're gonna make mistakes, and you can't rely on your friends to give you unbiased, trained attention to your feelings. Get a therapist, because you're gonna need it. And delving into poly, whether you stay there or not, it's fucking cool because you get to work out a lot of your shit.
Yeah.
So.
It's true.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you.
Before we go, can you tell our listeners where they can find more of you?
Ooh, I am most often present on the Facebook and the Twitter and the Instagram as Sex Nerd Sandra. I'm also at sexnerdsandra.com and on iTunes and all over the place. Where you get podcasts, you will most likely find 200 episodes of my show that you can listen to. Topical stuff about sex, clown sex, butt sex, emotional sex. I don't know, sex stuff.
Nice.
So yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so
thank
much,
you for being
Sandra.
here.
We really appreciate it. And if you guys have any questions for us that you want us to relay to Sandra, or that you feel like we missed, or you wanted us to bring up in a future episode, let us know. You can email us at info@multiamory.com, or you can find us at multiamory.com, or on the Facebooks and the Twitters and the Instagrams and all of those places. Just search for us there and you'll find us. And thank you so much. And if you want to join our discussion groups, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/multiamory. Thank you so much. We will see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, this is Dan Savage from the Savage Lovecast and Savage Love, and you're listening to a Swing Set podcast at Swing Set FM.